أشكر جميع من أسهم في التحضير لهذا المؤتمر، وكذلك من عمل جاهدا لإنجاحه. وهذه الجلسة جلسة خاصة بمركز الأمير سلمان لابحاث الإعاقة، وسرد لتاريخ طويل يزيد عن 20 عام. نحاول في هذه المدة الزمنية القصيرة أن نتطرق لأهم الإنجازات ونختتم إن شاء الله بما هو جديد. بداية نبدأ بالأستاذ الدكتور محسن بن علي حازمي، وهو من الناس الذين حقيقة وضعوا الأسس الأولى لمركز الأمير سلمان، وواحد من الذين ساهموا في بداياته. وما نراه اليوم هو عبارة عن استكمال لثمارهم التي أو البذور التي زرعوها ونقطف ثمارها الآن. فبداية أرحب ببروفيسور محسن الحازمي للتطرق لبعض إنجازات مركز الأمير سلمان لابحاث الإعاقة. فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Do you have a translator here? ترجمة فوري؟ ترجمة فوري. شكرا دكتور علي على التقديم، وأرحب بالزملاء المحدثين والأخوات الحاضرين. مركز الأمير سلمان لابحاث الإعاقة حقيقة بدأ كحلم. كان مجلس إدارة جمعية الأطفال المعوقين في أحد اجتماعاته يناقش إمكانية فتح فروع لجمعية الأطفال المعوقين في مختلف مناطق المملكة. كان هناك طلب الحقيقة وضع من المنطقة الغربية ومن مناطق أخرى في الواقع يطلب فتح فرع لجمعية أو فروع لجمعية الأطفال المعوقين. رئيس مجلس الإدارة في ذلك الوقت كان صاحب السمو الملك الأمير السلطان سلمان، ومن أعضاء مجلس الإدارة مجموعة من المتخصصين الأطباء والاجتماعيين ورجال الأعمال وما إلى ذلك. فدار النقاش لماذا لا يتم فتح قسم للأبحاث بحيث توفر المعلومة عن مشكلة الإعاقة في المملكة بصفة عامة وفي المناطق التي تطالب بفتح فروع للجمعية، لأنه لم تكن هناك معلومات متوفرة. الكلام هذا في عام 1991 كتب سمو الأمير سلطان بن سلمان بخط يده يعني بعض الأفكار، ودعي الدكتور سلطان السديري والدكتور محمد الطويرقي وأنا لوضع تصور لقسم أو مركز أو شيء من هذا القبيل للأبحاث العلمية يوفر المعلومات لجمعية الأطفال المعوقين عن مشكلة الإعاقة بصفة عامة في المملكة وفي مناطق مختلفة. بدأنا نحن ثلاثة وضعنا تصور قدم من مجلس الإدارة. هذا لا يتحرك السلايد. بدي بريدة في هذا ما يتحرك هذا السلايد. السلايد ما يتحرك. فطبعا تعرفون انه يقدر يعني مشكله الاعاقه على المستوى العالمي بحوالي 660 مليون معاق مختلف انواع الاعاقه، ومعروف أنه الإعاقة تمثل طيف واسع من أنواع التأثيرات، ورؤية في ذلك الوقت أنه لابد نشوف ماذا أين نحن في هذه المعادلة. فمع تطور أعمال الجمعية كنا برزت الحاجة إلى توفير معلومات عن مشكلة الإعاقة وأنواعها ومسبباتها توزيعها ومتطلبات المملكة، ولذلك طرح الأمير سلطان بن سلمان كما أسلف هذه الفكرة، وبدأ الدكتور سلطان وأنا والدكتور الدولي بوضع بعض التصورات. هذه كانت تسمى لجنة علمية استشارية، ثم رؤي أيضا إضافة لجنة أخرى علمية تعنى بالجانب التربوي والتعليمي. احنا كنا 3 تقريبا أطباء أو في التأهيل، فصارت الآن عندنا العنصرين الأساسيين اللي هو التعليم والتربية والجانب الطبي والتأهيل. عملنا لعدة سنوات، وبدأنا في كلية صغيرة في مركز أو في جمعية الأطفال المعوقين، وبعد ذلك عملنا على أن يكون الرؤية للمركز أن تكون لها شخصية اعتبارية منفصلة الحقيقة عن جمعية الأطفال المعوقين، وصدر في ضوء ذلك يعني حاضر المركز الحقيقة بدعم معنوي ومادي من صاحب السمو الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز. بدأنا نرى أن هناك زخم الحقيقة يؤهلنا لأن نطالب بفصل المركز عن الجمعية وأن يكون له شخصية اعتبارية. فصدرت موافقة وزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية، ذلك الوقت كانت وزارة للعمل والشؤون الاجتماعية في 1412 بأن يكون شخصية اعتبارية هذا المركز. وانتقلنا إلى مركز الحي بالماسي اللي هو الآن بالواقع هو مركز الأمير سلمان لابحاث الإعاقة، وبدأنا في إعداد المركز للنفوذ، وشرف المركز الحقيقة بافتتاح الموقع من قبل صاحب السمو الأمير سلمان بن عبد العزيز. وهذه كما ترون أمامكم هي الوثيقة ودعم صاحب السمو الملك الأمير سلمان بن عبد العزيز الحقيقة المركز ماديا ومعنويا، وحصلنا على قرار وزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية بأن يكون المركز ذو شخصية اعتبارية، وفتح سموه المركز. وهذه وثيقة تأسيس المركز كما تبدو أمامكم. دور سمو الأمير بصفته الرئيس الأعلى للمركز كان حقيقة محوريا وهام للبدء من الصفر كما يقال، ولذلك تم تكوين مجلس للأمناء بعهد سمو الأمير سلطان بن سلمان الذي كان في ذلك الوقت أيضا رئيس مجلس إدارة جمعية الأطفال المعوقين ولا زال. لكن حلقة الوصل الحقيقة كان هو سمو الأمير سلطان، لكن الدعم المادي والمعنوي استمر من قبل سمو الأمير سلمان، وكان بعرض الموضوع على أنظار المقام السامي. تفضل بدعم المركز ب10 ملايين، سمو الأمير سلمان أيضا 5 ملايين، فأصبح لدى المركز يعني قاعدة مالية للبدء في أعماله. تكون فريق لوضع استراتيجية لعمل المركز بدءا من رسالته كما ترون أن يكون المركز متميزا ومعترفا به في أبحاث الإعاقة من خلال دعم البحوث التي تساهم في إثراء المعرفة عن جوانب الوقاية والرعاية والتأهيل إلى آخره، من خلال التزام المركز بتعاليم الدين الإسلامي الحنيف وقدرته على التنظيم واستخدام الكفاءات. في ذلك الوقت ولا زال إلى الآن فلسفة المركز أن تكون يعني حلقة وصل بين الباحثين من جهة وبين المجتمع من جهة أخرى. يعني لا، المركز لا يقدم الحقيقة مختبرات ولا تسهيلات لإجراء البحوث، ولكن يدعم البحوث في أماكنها سواء في الجامعات أو في دور البحث العلمي سواء في الداخل أو في الخارج. هذه هي الأسس التي استمرت مع المركز ومشى عليها إلى الآن. مجال عمل المركز هو تشجيع الأبحاث العلمية وخاصة ما يتعلق الاكتشاف والتدخل المبكر والرعاية والتأهيل أيضا في جانب آخر. الأهداف الأساسية التي انطلقت منها رسالة المركز وأعماله هو أن نقوم بالأبحاث العلمية وتشجيعها في مجالات الإعاقة كما أسلفت في دور البحث العلمي وفي الجامعات ومراكز البحوث الأخرى، وأن يعمل على الإفادة محليا من نتائج البحوث والدراسات التطبيقية وإعداد قواعد معلومات وإثراء المعرفة من خلال المؤتمرات والندوات، ونحن الآن في المؤتمر الدولي الرابع، والتواصل مع المؤسسات الحكومية والأهلية لتشجيع التعاون وإيجاد قنوات تخطيط لتطوير مختلف وجهات أو أوجه الرعاية. هذه هي الأسس التي انطلق منها المركز. جهاز التنظيمي كما ذكرت هناك مجلس أمناء برئاسة الأمير سلطان سلمان، وأيضا هناك مدير تنفيذي شرفت بالبداية أن أكون مشرف على المركز من الفترة 1991 إلى 2001، ثم توالى الزملاء اللي هم الآن في صدر الفقاعة على رئاسته لسنوات محدودة في الواقع، ثم الآن المدير التنفيذي هو الدكتور سلطان السديري. المسيرة العلمية باختصار أنه قمنا بدعم الحقيقة عدد من البحوث صنفت الآن تكون بحوث للدراسات العليا، وقمنا في ذلك الوقت بدعم درجات علمية كالدكتوراه والماجستير، وأيضا بحوث تطبيقية. قام المركز الحقيقة ببحث وطني لتحديد مدى مشكلة الإعاقة في المملكة، يعني حجم المشكلة هل هي كبيرة صغيرة، أسباب الإعاقة وأنواعها مسبباتها، وكان بدعم هذا البحث الحقيقة بصفة أساسية مركز الأمير سلمان لابحاث الإعاقة وجمعية الأطفال المعوقين، شركة السابق مدينة الملك عبد العزيز للعلوم والتقنية. كذلك قمنا ببحث آخر في منطقة القصيم أيضا حول نفس الموضوع، وبحث ثالث في المدينة المنورة أيضا نحدد مدى مشكلة الإعاقة لدى الأطفال بصورة خاصة، كما قلت لأن فلسفة المركز أصلا انطلقت من حاجة الجمعية إلى فتح فروع، ولماذا تفتح الفروع هنا وهناك ما لم يكن هناك مؤشرات على أهمية هذه المراكز. المركز أيضا بالإضافة إلى البحوث ودعمها الأساسية أسهم في تحقيق تفاعل بين الجهات المعنية سواء حكومية أو قطاع خاص والجمعيات الخيرية وما إلى ذلك، فأصبح هو الحقيقة المنسق الأساس فيما يتعلق بجميع أوجه الرعاية والبحوث العلمية في مجال الإعاقة. في الفترة الماضية وقع المركز 64 اتفاقية استراتيجيات محلية ودولية وإقليمية، وشارك في 5 مؤتمرات وندوات علمية، وهو يجري أيضا يعني على ما أذكر في الفترة على الأقل كنت أنا مسؤول فيها كان في هناك محاضرات شهرية توعوية وتثقيفية للمجتمع عشان نوطد علاقة المركز بخدمات المجتمع من خلال هذه الأعمال. وهناك أكيد عدد من البرامج والمشاريع البحثية قيد الإنجاز وبعضها أنجز، وربما الزملاء والدكتور سلطان السديري يعني يأخذون من الفترة اللي أنا كنت مشرف فيها إلى الآن، وكيف تطور المركز الآن أصبح الحقيقة مركز يعني مرجع فيما يتعلق بالبحوث العلمية، ليس فقط على المستوى المحلي ولكن أيضا على المستوى الإقليمي والدولي. فهذه الشريحة الحقيقة تلخص ما هي البرامج. عندنا كان برامج للمنح لغاية البرنامج السادس، وكما سلفت من ضمن الأعمال هو إقامة المؤتمرات، والمؤتمر الأول والثاني والثالث كنا نناقش توصياتها على مدى 3 أيام الماضية، ولكن خلوني بس أختصر لكم الموضوع فيما يتعلق ما هي نتائج هذه البحوث والمؤتمرات. أولا نظام رعاية المعوقين اللي صدر في عام 2000 كان الحقيقة أحد التوصيات الصادرة على المؤتمرات الماضية، وأيضا البحث الوطني لا زال هو المرجع فيما يتعلق حجم الإعاقة وأنواعها وتوزيعها في مختلف مناطق المملكة. كان هو البحث الوحيد، مع الأسف لم تسير بحوث بعد كده وتحديثه. أشرت إلى أن هناك بحث في الإعاقة منطقة القصيم، بحث استقصائي عن الإعاقة منطقة المدينة المنورة، ثم توالت البحوث الحقيقة إلى أصبحت الآن وتطورت كما ونوعا في الواقع إلى أن أصبحت الآن يعني عدد كبير منها، ربما كما أسلفت الزملاء والدكتور سلطان يحدث هذه المعلومات. أنا كنت فقط مسؤول عن فترة 11 سنة اللي هي التأسيسية. أعتقد أنا أوقف هنا، وإذا كان في أي اتصال في تلك الفترة أنا تحت أمركم. شكرا لكم على استماعكم.
Good afternoon. My name is Terrence Dolan, and it's an honor to be invited to speak here, particularly with my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Osmi, Dr. Steve Schroeder, and Dr. Sultan Saderi. What I'm going to do today is to tell you a story about newborn screening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This story, first of all, I should say that this spring a book will be coming out titled The Children of the Kingdom, and the foreword for the book will be written by His Royal Highness Prince Sultan. When I was called originally by representatives from Prince Sultan in 1999, they were talking about expanding the mission of the center. And one of the things that we had talked about that time was the incidence of diseases in young children, particularly newborns. In 1999, 2000, 2001, for all intents and purposes, there was no newborn screening going on in the kingdom. At that time, about 98 to 99% of births globally were being screened, but at that time there was none in Saudi Arabia. So in discussions with the Prince, in discussions with my colleague, Dr. Heidi Al-Askari, and of course talking with Dr. Sultan Saderi, we decided to start a newborn screening program. And I came over in February of 2001, and in 2002 we started our efforts to, we decided to start a screening program. And at that time, we thought it was important to do that for a variety of reasons. To define what a newborn screening is, a newborn screening disease, it almost always or often is an autosomal genetic disorder that, if not detected at birth, can develop into severe disabilities, if not death. But if detected at birth, it's quite straightforward and common to be able to intervene successfully and prevent that disease from developing, and often leading to a typical developing child. A newborn screen, as I say, is an autosomal genetic disorder often, in which the genetic material from the parents is not transferred to the newborn in such a way that key amino acids, key acylcarnitines, proteins don't develop in the child. And as a result, the child is born without the ability to produce one of these key elements. A typical example of a newborn screen would be phenylalanine or phenylketonuria. And phenylketonuria is a disease in which the infant is born without the ability to produce an enzyme called phenylketonuria hydroxylase. And without that enzyme, the child is not able to break down an amino acid called phenylalanine. And as a result, there's a buildup of this amino acid in the child. And without doing something about it, the child will eventually develop a severe intellectual disability and perhaps heart disease and other maladies, and even death in the long term. So that would be a typical example, but there are right now in the world probably 30 to 50 of these diseases that have been identified. At the time we started this program, we had to first of all get the approval and the backing of the royal family and the rules in the kingdom. And we had to go through a series of steps. The first thing we had to do was identify the birthing sites in the kingdom, and then to train personnel in those birthing sites to take drops of blood from every newborn and put them on tandem paper and then transfer them overnight to our central laboratory facilities, which were located at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center. Those drops were then transferred by overnight express to the central facilities here in Riyadh. And at that time, the diseases that we started screening for were the diseases shown in this graphic right here. Those are 16 examples of newborn screening that had either an amino acid or an acylcarnitine that had been identified with that particular disease, and by checking to see if the newborn had that material in their blood, we would know that they had one of these particular diseases. When they would chip it into our central facility, we would analyze the materials. We would analyze the materials to see if they had these diseases. And at that time, the main way to analyze the drops of blood was through a device called a tandem mass spectrometer. But this slide, first of all, shows the nature of the population we were working with. I don't know if you can see it at all, but in 2005, there were approximately 16 million Saudi citizens in the country. And between 2005 and 2013, there was almost a 25% growth in the kingdom, about 23%. And as a result, over the years from 2005 to 2013, which are the years that I'll show data for, there was a significant growth in the kingdom. And at that time, when we started in 2005, there were 400,000 births a year in the kingdom. In the first year, 2005, when we got the program off the ground, we screened about 50,000 newborns. By 2013, when the data were accumulated for this in this presentation, there were almost 500,000 births, and in the intervening years, there were approximately 1 million screens successfully conducted. I should have pointed out early in the presentation that the director of the screening program is Dr. Ali O'Dave, and he is the person individually responsible for the success of the program that is ongoing. Now, what I started saying a minute ago is that these drops are shipped to a central facility, and the central facility is represented by this picture of a tandem mass spectrograph. For all intents and purposes, each of these amino acids or acylcarnitines have a particular molecular weight. And by essentially running these samples through a centrifuge and seeing how far out in the spinning process the molecule transfers tells you the molecular weight, and consequently it tells you which, if any, of these diseases are being identified. And the results of this process are then represented on a histogram, and in this case I just show you an example of an analysis of a acylcarnitine in which there are, I think, 16 different molecules being tested. In this particular case, that would be a normal outcome from whatever this acylcarnitine is. But in the computer, it knows which each of these molecular weights are and which ones to measure, and then which expectation you would find for each of these molecules. And if any of these are aberrant, the computer would tell you this particular amino acid, for example, is abnormal. And to give you an idea of the rapidity of this process, this tandem mass spec can probably do about 40,000 samples a month. So not only is it an efficient process, but it is a very quick process. So as I said a while ago, in those intervening years from 2005 to 2013, we did just under 1 million screens. Now I want to end with 2 points. And these are important points for inborn screening, particularly in Saudi Arabia. And the 2 points are, one is the interaction between Islam and medicine, and another is the interaction between Islam and consanguinity. First of all, there are 57 some countries in the world that are predominantly Islamic, and 20 of them are located in the Middle East. But the rules for the medicine of the analyses and treatments of these newborn screens is usually discussed and determined by an organization called the Organization of Islamic Conferences. And there are 57 countries that belong to this organization. And since in the last 10, 12 years, they have been making some dramatic and important decisions with respect to how to work with children with newborn screens. And a lot of these changes were described in a couple of articles, one in 2005 and one in 2007, by Dr. Aida Agil in this country, in which she wonderfully describes what was going on with this committee and some of the changes they made. Two that are most prominent that I wanted to at least mention today. One had to do with the temporary use of contraception in this country, and the other had to do with, in extreme measures, the use of sterilization. In the latter case, sterilization was approved by this committee in some instances in which the mother's life would be threatened by a pregnancy, or the prospective mother had a history of children with congenital anomalies, and as a result could get permission for sterilization. The other point I wanted to end on had to do with consanguinity. consanguinity, which of course is the marriage of relatives, is growing in the world right now, globally in fact, but among the countries most prominently represented in marriages of consanguinity are Islamic countries. And the slide that I wanted to show, shows the countries, there we go, the countries in the Middle East that are countries in which there's a preponderance of consanguineous marriages, and Dr. Hazmi has showed before, but in general, the percentage of consanguineous marriages in these countries runs from about 40%, with a high in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of about 60%. And it's all quite clear now that the rate of incidence of babies born with newborn diseases is higher in consanguineous marriages. Now there is a misunderstanding, I would say, in the Western world, certainly in the United States, that this high incidence of consanguineous marriages is related to membership in the Islamic religion, Muslims. The fact of the matter is that that in fact Islam does not propose, support, condone consanguineous marriages, and the reason that there's quite an extensive literature on this now, and the reason that people marry their cousins in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has primarily to do with, entirely to do, I would say, with cultural reasons. And as I started to say, there is an extensive literature now on why they do that. And I would say, in sort of summary of that literature, that there are many articulated reasons why people marry their first cousins, and in truth, they're important, significant reasons, and that people who make the decision to marry their cousins are doing so for good reasons. So the decision a parent has to make is, on the one side, the risk of medical problems, and on the positive side, the important thing is that they get out of marrying their cousins. So I want to end with two comments. One is the present concerns about the program in Saudi Arabia. And that is, in this past year, there were nearly 5,000 births, and that only 42% of those newborns were screened. There were 16 different diseases that were screened for, and that there are many countries in the world that are screening for 25 and up number of diseases. Now, Dr. O'Dave and I have discussed this on several occasions, and it's really a point that's in some disagreement internationally as to how many of these diseases actually can be identified with some validity, and we should screen for them, and other diseases that in fact it's not clear yet that they're ready to be screened for, but it's a continuing discussion. I want to end with my positive expectations for this great program. One is that I expect that in the future there will be an increase in the number of institutions that are doing screening. I suspect that the number of diseases in this ongoing science will be, an increasing number will be screened for. And as a result, there will be an increase in the number of diseases that are screened for in Saudi Arabia. And if they, in fact, in the future, increase the number of diseases being screened for up to, let's say, 25, if they increase the percentage of newborns that are being screened, there would be a significantly fewer number of sick children being born with newborn errors that would not be eligible or would not end up being in the programs to intervene on these diseases. So with that note, I'll stop. Thank you.
Steve.
Get to advance your slides like I did. Well, it seems we lost our moderator, so the crowd is shrinking. And so I'm going to be short. I came to Prince Salman Center in May of 2002 after Dr. Dolan had to leave because of personal family reasons. And so both of us have been colleagues and friends for years, so we're pretty much on the same page. And a lot of what I did over those 2 years was building the infrastructure that was begun under Dr. Dolan. Okay, so I basically set up 5 goals. One was to continue to solicit, review, and award, and monitor research on disabilities in the kingdom and neighboring countries. Okay, most of this research was conducted by Saudi scientists with 22 projects from other places in the Middle East. So basically, since many people were not accustomed to writing grant proposals, etc., Dr. Dolan had set the center up as a grant funding agency, research grant funding agency, much as the National Institutes of Health in the U.S., which is the biggest research granting agency in the world. And there wasn't exactly that kind of organization in the kingdom to help develop research. So we spent a lot of time on inviting new researchers, going out in different parts of the kingdom, looking for new researchers, and then inviting them to workshops at the Prince Salman Center, and going through everything: how to write a grant, how to write a good grant, the principles of scientific integrity, the fundamentals of statistic design, the fiscal accountability, qualifications of the investigators, all of the things necessary to write a good proposal and then conduct the research and follow through. And we drew on experts from King Saud University, from King Faisal Specialist Hospital Research Center in Prince Salman Center to do this. And this was quite successful. At these workshops, maybe 30 to 50 people would show up. And then often these people who attended these workshops would write the grant proposals. And these proposals were subjected to peer review. So there was a large peer review panel made up of scientists within the kingdom, but we also did international review, peer review. We would send the proposals out to other parts of the world, and they would participate in our review panels via Skype, which was just a new gadget at that time. And so that worked really well. And so in that process, we funded lots of things, including the newborn screening program, which was the principal funded program. But there were, over that year and a half, we funded perhaps 18 new projects, very substantial projects. Some had biomedical projects, some educational projects in special education and learning disabilities, projects in speech and language and hearing. There was one on theological research of the role of disabilities in Islam, which all these are pretty much completed now, except for newborn screening program and the studies of autism etc., would still go on and are still funded. And they've been published in the Saudi Medical Journal and other international scientific journals. So, and they're available at the center if anybody wants to look at them. The third goal was to become a government-approved charitable organization. As Dr. Al-Hazmi said, it became a legal entity earlier on, but then they wanted to establish themselves as a charitable organization, and this task was accomplished mostly by the then chair of the executive committee of the Prince Salman Center, His Excellency Khalid Al-Sudari, who is the chairman of the executive committee, and in conjunction with His Royal Highness Prince Sultan bin Salman. And this was very important, for which we're really grateful. And approval was given in late 2003. So that was accomplished. And the fourth goal was raising funds for an endowment, or as in the kingdom it's called a waqf. Well, so because the Prince Salman Center needed a source for funds, increased funds in the future to fund future research. And so I told the Prince he needed an endowment of $500 million Saudi riyals, right? And so he agreed to do this. My job was to solicit funds from foreign countries working in the kingdom, and he was going to go after the Saudi benefactors, right? Well, I was a miserable failure. It turns out that almost all foreign investors and companies are here to make money, and they're not interested in giving us money. So on the other hand, the Prince was a spectacular success. And these were some of the most memorable times of my time in the kingdom. He would, and his entourage would fly to, and of course he would pilot the plane, being a pilot and astronaut. He would fly the plane and to get into his flying time. And we would fly to Dammam or Dhahran or to Jeddah and go to the home of one of his friends and meet with a bunch of wealthy benefactors, potential benefactors. And so we would go in and he would give a rousing speech on the need for research on people with disabilities. And one of his main sources of evidence was a newborn screening program. And with the help of Mohammed Rashid and other scientists at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital Research Center, we put together a powerful like PowerPoints, and after a while he knew that perfectly. He could sell anybody. So he ended up raising over 400 million Saudi riyals in pledges, which these pledges are still being honored. So that was very important because it really meant that the Prince Salman Center was here to stay. It had a solid base, and so the fifth goal was to update the 5-year plan and prepare to turn the center over again to a Saudi. And so the 1995 5-year plan was an excellent plan, which we were all operating with. And I simply updated that. I simply wrote a progress report on it, which the board of directors adopted. The second task of preparing, turning the center back again was a much more labor-intensive thing. And with the help of Sheikh Mohammed Al-Saif, we brought in an organization consulting firm, which interviewed every member of the center wrote all of their interrelationships and the rules for operation of the centers, and those manuals. So we made up a whole long series of manuals. And then we applied for certification as a research organization from Moody's International, which is like a globally recognized outfit for certifying good organizations. And so we got that certification. And actually, at that time, in 2003, Prince Salman Center was considered the best research organization by Moody's International, at least in their certification system in the Middle East. So finally it was time for me to go home and turn it over to Saudi. And Dr. Sultan Sideri is that person. But meanwhile, I want to just say that this was such a life-changing experience for me. I met so many wonderful people, so dedicated to research for people with disabilities. It's something I'll never forget the rest of my life. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. I have to be fast because we are now putting the closing remarks for the conference in the main hall. My colleagues have gone through the elaborate description of what they have done during the time they have served in the Prince Salman Center for Disability Research. For just statistics, I remember as a young scientist complying to the wishes of an old professor, still a young scientist and still an old professor. Dr. Hazmi asked me to participate on activities of the scientific committee when the center was operating out of a small villa in the Disabled Children Association. With all honesty, we owe a lot to what Dr. Hazmi have established. He served for 10 years as the founding head of the research center, where we formulated a lot of activities and supported a lot of research projects. When we first did our first strategy in Al-Baha, and it was one of our good friends, Dr. Bill Cornish, who helped us to formulate our first strategy. Dr. Dibol, I remember he was running with Khalid al-Suderi in Al-Baha, and the baboons were running after them, and I was enjoying the view from my window in my hotel room. In January of 2001, we were privileged to get Dr. Dolan to become the director of the center. The reign was a little bit over 1 year, where he left, and we were privileged to have another dear friend, Dr. Schroeder, who stayed over 1.5 years in the center, and then I got stuck after they left me with all the nice inheritance that I have received with the hard work. Then we started our big move to establish a substantial endowment for the Prince Salman Center for Disability Research and move the center to become an independent organization that can really make a difference for the life of the disabled. We worked on a very intense begging exercise, like Dr. Schroeder was saying, going from one place to another. And then we worked very hard in making the reorganization of the center and the recruitment, where we recruited through a recruitment agency, a financial officer, and a number of key staff who helped in the organization of the center. And then we had Dr. Al-Askari, who became the deputy for research. And we established a number of programs like what you see now
as product of the Prince Salman Center for Disability Research, like accessibility, vocational training, daycare, center evaluation and regulation, going into the expansion of the metabolic screening. I enjoyed the slides of Dr. Dolan. They reminded me of the old days of the lectures that Dr. Rashid used to give. I think you stole some slides from him and Dr. Ali Nadir. And you know, those days were fun days. And now the program is a well-established program. Ministry of Health is no longer part of that program. It's been offered to all the other hospitals, primarily the private sector. After we gone through the programs, we went through a second round of a strategic orientation, utilizing the expertise of McKinsey, and the reorganization of the center took place. And this second strategy is making a lot of emphasis on learning disability, and also the database and the effort to establish what I would call bridging between different organization, governmental organization and non-profit, and also international organization. We had a number of activities in the past 2 years. The center still have a long way to go in really establishing the tradition of disability research, and we hope that in the years to come we will see the flourishment of such activities. As I am the last speaker and also the last director that is for the center, I would like to express my sincere thanks to all my colleagues who have preceded me and appreciate their hard work and their contribution to the center, and we hope that we will see a much better outcome in the years to come. I invite you now to join in the final summation remarks for the conference, which is now have started about five minutes, so if we run, we might get some of the goodies. I have heard that they are giving some gifts to the previous directors, and the gift will be in proportion to the years of service. So I think Muhsin is going to get all the... Thank you very much.